Yeah, to continue with the discussion, we said in the ancient times we had this division in the society according to the temperament of the individual. And he writes here, thought and knowledge, war and government, production and distribution, labor and service were carefully differentiated functions of society, each assigned to those who are naturally called to it, and providing the right means by which they could individually proceed towards their spiritual development and self-perfection. So this was the idea behind the separation of the classes. And you can imagine what happens that when the Kshatriya is asked to defend the country, then the other communities are not affected. The Brahmin and the Vaishya and the Shudra, they can function without being bothered. But today you can imagine whenever there's a war anywhere, that the whole country gets disturbed. Then the supply of food, supply of gas, supply of petrol, and all that is completely, is put into pell-mell. Whereas in the ancient system, then each one was looking after one part of the social maintenance. So the Kshatriya did his work perfectly. He was all bothered about the defense of the country and the borders, whatever, so that the other three communities could do what they wanted. Then the Brahmins looked after the knowledge and the distribution of learning, etc., thought and knowledge, so that while the others, they could function their own way into Shudra and Vaishya, etc. So this was one of the techniques how, and in one place in fact he writes, that how war was kept to a minimum in the sense that it affected in a minimum way the society. But today is not so. Because you see, there could be a bomb falling on you in the center of your city. And now terrorism is there everywhere. It's a hidden war, it's a secret war. You don't know which street the next bomb is going to blast. So today the warfare has come right into the middle of the society, disturbing all kinds of people, be it Vaishya or Shudra or Brahmin. But that time, it was kept outside. So only one part of the society was affected. 3/4 was kept undisturbed. Well, of course, there are stories, and when we have the Muslim invasions, we have seen the Muslim soldiers coming into the city and raping women and stealing the jewelry and plundering and burning and all that. But that was not until the Muslims came. We in our India, amongst the Hindu kings, they fought these wars, but on this ideology, they would never come down into the city and rape and plunder and all that. But it's the Muslim invasions that really brought in this plunder and rape of the women, etc. Because their ideals were different, they believed in something else, and they wanted to insult the womanhood of India, etc. So those practices came in much later. However, that was the advantage. Then Sri Aurobindo writes here in the next para, the modern life of a common obligation in all the main departments of human activity has its advantage. But in modern times, what are we doing? That we are not Kshatriyas or Shudras or Vaishyas. You see, I'm supposed to do all the works together. You see, a computer fellow, he has to do the technology and the knowledge in the office, then he has to come home, he has to earn the money, he has to be looking after his family, then he has to fight his battle through legal channels. So we are involved in the total system, each individual. So Sri Aurobindo says it has an advantage. It helps to greater solidarity, unity and fullness in the life of the community and a more all-round development of the complete human being, as opposed to the endless divisions and over-specialization and the narrowing and artificial shackling of the life of the individual to which the Indian system eventually led. So this is the beautiful analysis we get. The ancient system had its advantage, but the disadvantage were these endless divisions. Among the Kshatriyas, among the Brahmins, among the Vaishyas, there were again the particular, among the Vaishyas you will say you are a carpenter, you are a plumber, you are an electrician, you are this. So Vaishya was not one community, it was endlessly divided. So the carpenter would not be wedded to the mason, or the mason family would not be wedded to the electrician. So you see, there were subdivisions and specializations. That was the disadvantage. So Sri Aurobindo is writing that as against that, the modern system which really expects all these roles in one man is a great advantage, because it brings in a completer entity. And now again you can see the importance of integral education or integral yoga. Now no human being is allowed to be a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or a Shudra completely, exclusively. We actually, in the integral yoga and integral education, what is the whole ideal? When the mother says you've got to be trained in the mind level, the vital level, the physical level, the psychic level, that means now each one of us has to develop all the four aspects of the society. When we say the question of Ma Saraswati, perfection in work. And what was work in the ancient times? Shudra. So we are all supposed to be perfect Shudras now, because we have to bring in perfection in work. Then we are all supposed to be following Lakshmi, Mahalakshmi, provider of wealth, provider of harmony, provider of beauty. So these four aspects of the mother are nothing but these four aspects of the society. So now if we want to imbibe the mother's consciousness on all these four aspects, each one of us now is a simultaneous Brahmin and a Kshatriya and a Vaishya and a Shudra. It may be a little difference in capacities and there is some level difference, but this is how we hold on to the disciples of becoming a disciple of the mother. We cannot shun work saying, oh, there is Shudra work, I'm not going to go down and clean the latrines in the house or the street cleaning, because that is Shudra. We have no such now division. You can be a mason, you can work with a mason, you can dig the earth and saying, it's not that kind of a lordship. Then you can be reading the life divine, you can be doing the Vaishya, you have to, running this sakar is a good experience because I have to look after all the things. I have to see how the money comes, where it comes from, we have to see the architecture, the garden work, and we have got to be an integral personality. Because this is the yoga of the mother, that you cultivate all the four aspects of the mother. So you see now the modernization is really integralization in itself. So we can see now nature has worked out as it is with the specializations, Kshatriya and Vaishya and Shudra, etc. Specialization, the West is a materialistic, East is spiritualistic, again is specialization. But now there is a huge cauldron where East and West, where the four classes and everything is put together. There is a tremendous mixing that's taking place. And it is this kind of a mixing in which we have lost all the values. We have put into that mixture all the values also. What were religious values, ethical values, moral values, everything we have put into the cauldron. But out of this, a new system, a new human being is to be born. If you remember those who come to my synthesis of yoga class, I read out a passage from the mother where she says, this is because the supermind is coming, all our value systems have been dumped. They are no more relevant, be it ethical or moral or religious. They cannot hold anymore. Because it's kind of, supermind is really pulling down the carpet under the feet of all these values. So do not be surprised that whatever we see is in the name of immorality, unethicality, irreligious, etc., it is expected to happen. And now we see from the point of view of Sri Aurobindo also, this is where the times are leading. So it's really a massive, massive change that is taking place in this human society on every front, religious or individual or ethical or on a national level, everywhere. Well, this is what I wanted to bring to a note, that how in the times of the Gita, the ideals were different. This is something we have to note. Because before I take up this, because where Sri Krishna is really expressing about the ideal of the Kshatriya, today in our modern times we cannot hold on to the same ideal. In fact, in one place, Sri Aurobindo does mention that there is definitely the influence of the times, although this is a universal teaching, the Bhagavad Gita, it cannot escape the impact of the time, at that time, whatever were the rules. So, some of these things we have to understand. Otherwise, we cannot be insisting, no, Gita says be a Kshatriya, and so today I must be a Kshatriya, I'm a Shudra. No. In those times, Kshatriya's ideology was that. But today, as he writes, in modern times, things have changed. So Gita also needs to be reinterpreted, reviewed in the light of the present times. So that is why Aurobindo has taken up the essays on the Gita only to tell us that we have to now bring out only the universal aspect, that is the sadhana aspect, not the classification of the classes, not the Kshatriyahood and all that. So it's on this level that we can benefit from the Gita. Otherwise, we may go back to this ancient, dogmatic culture. Well, having said that, I'll come back to the text of this chapter 7. And please keep all this in mind. I've not wasted my time, but I have to give you the right perspective. Otherwise, we may misunderstand the Gita and say, oh, Lord Krishna said, be a Kshatriya, so what are we doing? Things have changed, right? So I take up the second para now. The answer of a hero to a hero, shall we say, but not that which we should expect from a divine teacher, from whom we demand rather that he shall encourage always gentleness and saintliness, that you shall encourage always gentleness and saintliness and self-abnegation and the recoil from worldly aims and cessation from the ways of the world. Yeah, obviously, when we read Arjuna's argument, we are all sort of convinced that Arjuna is right. That how can you kill your own Pitrus? How can you kill your own Gurus? How can you kill your own family members? You see, the argument is very convincing. And in fact, a common man would say, why is Shri Krishna asking him to kill? Isn't killing something immoral? And killing your own guru and your master is the worst thing you can ever do. So what Arjuna says, that all this is a sin, is perfectly right. So when Shri Krishna is saying that go ahead and do your duty, we can't understand why Shri Krishna is asking Arjuna to go away from gentleness and saintliness and self-abnegation. So this is the first shock of the Gita, in fact. Out of your devotion, you may say, yes, Lord Krishna is right. But a Westerner, perhaps, for example, who takes to the Gita, he doesn't have devotion in Lord Krishna, but he takes up the work. Say, if he wants to study that. Then he gets a shock that why is Krishna telling Arjuna to kill these hundreds of people, and Arjuna is so right. When he says, what shall I do with this kingdom where there is no women folk, there are no people, there are only the elders are there, old people are there. So, Sri Aurobindo is really analyzing here the same question. The Gita expressly says that Arjuna has thus lapsed into unheroic weakness, his eyes full and distressed with tears, his heart overcome by depression and discouragement, because he is invaded by pity. He says, Kripaya Vistam. Is this not then a divine weakness? Is not pity a divine emotion which should not thus be discouraged with harsh rebuke? Or are we in face of a mere gospel of war and heroic action, a Nietzschean creed of power and highbrow strength, of Hebraic or old Teutonic hardness, which holds pity to be a weakness and thinks like the Norwegian hero who thanked God because he had given him a hard heart? So really we do question and say, is Lord Krishna encouraging this kind of a violence? Isn't pity for human beings the right thing? Should we not have really compassion for your brethren and say, hey, do not kill the other human beings? So in a way, Sri Krishna could be criticized if you really look at him impartially. So he says, is pity a human weakness? Or the other extreme is a Nietzschean view, where pity has no place. Even, all this religion has no place. God has no place, because this is all human weakness. So all these higher qualities for a Nietzschean are human frailties. You must be strong. You must be able to kill. You must be able to do this. Pity has no place in your life. So is it that Sri Krishna is really propounding? Be a Nietzschean. Do not have any pity. Well, there is one thing here. I would thank anyone who can give me this reference. I could not find it myself. I looked it out. The Norwegian hero who thanked God because he had given him a hard heart. If anyone comes across and knows, please do tell me, because I have not been able to find out who is that Norwegian who thanked God because he had given him a hard heart. There's one reference I failed to work out. But the teaching of the Gita springs from an Indian creed. And to the Indian mind, compassion has always figured as one of the largest elements of divine nature. We are not speaking about from a kind of a German angle or Nietzschean angle, where pity is a weakness. In our Indian culture, of course in other cultures too, except for the Nietzsche perhaps, this compassion has figured as one of the largest elements of the divine nature. The teacher himself, enumerating in a later chapter the qualities of the godlike nature in man, places among them compassion to creatures, gentleness, freedom from wrath, and from the desire to slay and do hurt, no less than fearlessness and high spirit and energy. So here we have, what Sri Aurobindo refers to are these verses. There is on chapter 16, verses 1 to 3. I read out the verses from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16. The Blessed Lord said, fearlessness, purity of temperament, steadfastness in the yoga of knowledge, giving, self-control, sacrifice, the study of scripture, ascesis, candor, and straightforwardness, harmlessness, truth, absence of wrath, self-denial, calm, absence of fault-finding, compassion to all beings, absence of greed, gentleness, modesty, freedom from restlessness, energy, forgiveness, patience, cleanness, absence of envy and pride. These are the wealth of the man born into the Deva nature. What we say, the 10 commandments here are the commandments from the Gita. That these are the things that are required or expected. And you have seen there, one of them is compassion to all beings. So again the question comes, if Sri Krishna himself is telling that this person of the divine qualities of the divine nature should have compassion, then why is it that he is not allowing Arjuna to have this kind of an attitude? That is, not to kill his people. Maybe the answer is in the definition of pity and compassion. You see, pity is a good thing. Compassion is a greater thing. But what Arjuna is going through is self-pity. It is not the real compassion of the Buddha. So basically, it is a self-pity. It is the self-pity, is this egoistic stand which is, as we know very well, that the mind can really come out with any kind of an argument, any kind of a defense. So it is the self-pity of his own egoistic stand which is being couched in a moral, religious language. And even quoting the Shastras in the name of the Dharma, in the name of the sin, in the name of this and that. So what Sri Krishna is discouraging in Sri Krishna is a self-pity. Not that you should not have compassion, because you have seen, he himself says compassion for others is one of the greatest divine features. So, he says the teacher himself, enumerating in a later chapter the qualities, I've read this. So where he says, gentleness, freedom from wrath and from the desire to slay and do hurt, no less than fearlessness and high spirit and energy. So Lord Krishna gives value to all this. Compassion, not to kill others, be fearless, and not to do any harm to others. So it's not that Sri Krishna is not aware. But then he would say, now read the next, harshness and hardness and fierceness and a satisfaction in slaying enemies and amassing wealth and unjust enjoyments are asuric qualities. They come from the violent, titanic nature which denies the divine in the world and the divine in man and worships desire only as its deity. It is not then from any such standpoint that the weakness of Arjuna merits rebuke. Because you must be convinced of this stand, otherwise this is one of the things that, sometimes I've seen in a common human, in a conference, we come across these questions a lot. Why Sri Krishna takes this stand of non-compassion, killing, hurting other people? Well, we'll read that. I'm not trying to explain that right away. But this is the question in mind. Whence has come to thee this dejection, says Sri Krishna, this stain and darkness of the soul in the hour of difficulty and peril? There's the same verse 2 in chapter 2. Because one side he says, all that is undivine, dasyu, lower nature, is to kill, is to harm people, is to be, what he says, full of the unjust enjoyments and being a slave of desire. And at the same time, he is almost pushing Arjuna to do these so-called unjust actions, to kill, to do this. So Sri Krishna is saying, why are you getting into this dejection, this stain and darkness of the soul? Imagine what a strong rebuke. He says, you are in the darkness of the soul. Ask Krishna of Arjuna. The question points to the real nature of Arjuna's deviation from his heroic qualities. There's a divine compassion which descends to us from on high, and for the man whose nature does not possess it, is not cast in its mold, to pretend to be the superior man, the master man or the superman is a folly and an insolence. For he alone is the superman who most manifests the highest nature of the Godhead in humanity. So Sri Aurobindo is explaining that this is actually one of the characteristics of the next superman, to have this divine compassion. In fact, one who does not have this compassion is not to be even claimed as even a superior man or even a man to that extent. So you see, Sri Aurobindo is only now sort of putting into focus the problem, the question. That one side, we know compassion is important. Without compassion, that cannot be a human nature, and leave alone wanting to aspire to be a superman. That is one of the basic factors. And here, there is a writing in volume 16, page 401. A sadhak asks Sri Aurobindo this question, and a very beautiful question, and I'm reading out this 2 pages in fact, but it is really, it throws a lot of light onto Arjuna's problem. the letter says, I have encountered in my life several examples of people living or trying to live in the universal consciousness. And it seemed to me that it rendered them less compassionate, less humane, less tender to the sufferings of others. It seems to me that if it is necessary not to remain in the individual consciousness where it is a question of our own sufferings, it is otherwise when it is a question of sympathizing with the suffering of others. In my opinion, we feel more keenly the troubles of our brothers in humanity if we remain in the individual consciousness. But I may be mistaken and ask only to be enlightened by you on this point. I hope you understand the question. To be in the individual consciousness, he says, is better because we can feel the pain and suffering of our brethren. But if you get into the universal consciousness, you are so beyond this suffering and sorrow that you are apathetic, not sympathetic with the human suffering. You say, well, I'm in my bliss, I'm in my Ananda, I don't care what happens to others. So he says, that is my view. What do you have to say, Aurobindo? And here is the long answer. Is it certain that such people are living in the universal consciousness? Or if they are, is it certain that they are really less human and compassionate? May they not be exercising their humanity in another fashion than the obvious and external signs of sympathy and tenderness? So that's the first question. You see, we think if you are not sympathetic to humanity, you are not universal. But Aurobindo is asking the question that if you don't show, you see, the whole thing is the question of that may they not be exercising their humanity in another fashion. Is it necessary that I should go into the tsunami area and into the where there is a kind of a violence or an earthquake, then I must distribute the food and the clothes and the chappals. Then only I am supposed to have the sympathy? If I don't do that, is it that I do not have sympathy? If a man is really insensible to the experiences of others in the world, he is not living in the full universal consciousness. By definition, per se, we have read a lot about this universal consciousness in our recent classes. That when you are in the universal consciousness, you cannot escape but be with the suffering of humanity. You cannot escape. That is the definition of a universal consciousness, that you are identified with humanity. If you say, I have no identification, I have no sympathy, I have no pain for humanity, that itself disqualifies you. So your claim is disqualified, that I am in the universal consciousness. We say, sorry, you are stuck up in a wrong place and with a wrong understanding. So either he has shut himself up in an experience of an individual peace and self-content, or he is absorbed by his contact with some universal principle in its abstract form without regard to its universal action, or he is living inwardly apart from the universe in touch with something transcendent of world experience. All these states are useful to the soul in its progress, but they are not the universal consciousness. Look at Aurobindo, it's so clear and absolutely clear, saying either you are stuck up in a universal peace where you do not see the universal action. That means, or you are self-absorbed inwardly in some other level, but definitely not the universal consciousness. When a man lives in the cosmic self, he necessarily embraces the life of the world, and his attitude towards that world, struggling upward from the egoistic state, must be one of compassion, of love, or of helpfulness. The Buddhists held that immersion in the infinite non-ego was in itself an immersion in a sea of infinite compassion. The liberated sannyasin is described in the Gita and in other Hindu books as one whose occupation is beneficence to all creatures. But this vast spirit of beneficence does not necessarily exercise itself by the outward forms of emotional sympathy and active charity. It's a very, very important letter because it's not, I've taken the occasion of the Gita to bring it out, but these are a lot of our misnotions. Showing charity, giving charity, showing emotional sympathy. All these things are not necessarily the qualifications of a universal spirit. And at the same time, if you are truly universal, this is automatic. You don't have to show the word that we are against is showmanship of charity. And Aurobindo would say all this kind of altruism, philanthropy is nothing but a showmanship. It does not come out of your genuine universal consciousness. So he says, but this vast spirit of beneficence does not necessarily exercise. You see a rishi in the Himalayas or a rishi in some forest may not even know that there was a tsunami in 2 years back. May not even know that there's a war in the West, in Israel or in Iraq or Iran somewhere. And yet, by his universal consciousness, he feels the pain. He does affect the human consciousness. He does elevate it. So he says one does not necessarily have to exercise. We must not bend down all natures or all states of the divine consciousness in man to the one form of helpfulness which seems to us the most attractive, the most beautiful, or the most beneficent. You see how much of our ideology is there that if I donate money, then only, I'm considered, hey, he's a great man of heart, great sympathy, a great mind. He says it's not at all necessary. We don't have to exhibit. And we don't have to, as he says, bend down all natures to this single rule that you must show charity, otherwise you are unspiritual, not having universal consciousness. There's a higher sympathy than that of the easily touched emotions, a greater beneficence than that of an obvious utility to particular individuals in their particular sufferings. The egoistic consciousness passes through many stages in its emotional expansion. Now look at this, pay attention to this, a beautiful analysis. The egoistic consciousness passes through many stages in its emotional expansion. At first, it is bound within itself, callous, therefore, to the experiences of others. Second, afterwards, it is sympathetic only with those who are identified in some measure with itself, indifferent to the indifferent, malignant to the hostile. This is simple. First, I am an egocentric man. Then when I have a family, I say, okay, I have to look after my family. I'm sympathetic with my family, my extended family, my relations. Something happens to my relation, I run down, I have tears for them. But those are not in my family, I'm indifferent. We hear in the newspaper so many people are dead. We see on the TV somebody. No, it doesn't bother to be Mr. XYZ. It's just a name that means nothing. So we don't have any sympathy outside the family. That's the second level of expansion. And then even malignant to the hostile. When it overcomes this respect for persons, it is ready for the reception of an altruistic principle. But even charity and altruism are often essentially egoistic in their immediate motive. The third step which we have missed is when you say no, I go beyond my family. Somebody is suffering in Pakistan, it doesn't matter to me. There was a huge volcanic eruption, and people are suffering. There was a huge earthquake, people are suffering. So I go on the third level, beyond my family circle, and so no, he is a human being suffering, so I'll help. So this is the altruistic principle. But even charity and altruism are often essentially egoistic in their immediate motive. They are stirred by the discomfort of the sight of suffering to the nervous system, or by the pleasurableness of others' appreciation of our kindliness, or by the egoistic self-appreciation of our own benevolence, or by the need of indulgence in sympathy. I mean, I have not read anyone who is more direct than this. See the motivations behind altruism. Extraordinary psychological analysis. One, they are stirred by the discomfort of the sight of suffering to the nervous system. You know, we have this dog lovers, animal lovers and all this. And so, I can't see the dog suffering. Take it to the hospital. So why have you sent the dog or the human being to the hospital? Because you were bothered. You could not stand the suffering of the person or the animal. So you have helped because of your own nervous suffering. So, number one, or by the pleasurableness of others' appreciation of our kindliness. That we don't have to say, everyone says, put my name under the placard, put my name in this newspaper. You have seen all our chief ministers, they do nothing but, pose that they are giving a cycle to the old lady, take a photograph, put in the newspaper. But the cycle also is not bought by him, somebody else gives it. But they want to pose saying that, look, I have given. So by the pleasurableness of others' appreciation of our kindliness. Second reason. Third, by the egoistic self-appreciation of our own benevolence. You feel good, yeah, I have done something, Somebody was suffering. Nobody may tell you. But in the beginning, you may lick your own wounds and you'll see for 3 days, 4 days, nobody's appreciated your work. Then psychologically, you start appreciating your own work. Nobody has told me, they don't know about what I've done. But I've done something great, So there is a self-appreciation. Or by the need of indulgence in sympathy. This is all the motivation behind altruism. There are philanthropists who would be troubled if the poor were not always with us, for they would then have no field for their charity. I think this mother also jokes on this. I think she quotes a French author who says that, it will be a tragic day when if there are not any poor people or suffering people upon earth. Because what will these altruistic people do? They will never feel happy if there is no poverty. So this is one way. Now we go to the next stage. So we have seen the 3 stages: self-bound, family, altruism, but that is also a kind of a egoistic trend because you have got all these 4 trends. Now, we begin to enter into the universal consciousness when, apart from all individual motive and necessity, by the mere fact of our unity of our being with all others, their joy becomes our joy, their suffering our suffering. But we must not mistake this for the highest condition. 4th one is the universal condition, when we are entering into joy and pleasure of others, suffering of others. After a time, we are no longer overcome by any suffering, our own or others, but are merely touched and respond in helpfulness. And there is yet another state. You see how analytic he is. So the 5th one is, we are no longer overcome by suffering of others or of our own. That is the Gita, beyond suffering. 4th stage after the altruism is, you are touched by other suffering. Then you go beyond, you say you are neither touched by other suffering or my own suffering. And there is yet another state in which the subjection to suffering is impossible to us because we live in the beatitude. But this does not deter us from love and beneficence, any more than it is necessary for a mother to weep or be overcome by the little childish griefs and troubles of her children in order to love, understand and soothe. So the other topmost level is you are in the beatitude, but it does not mean that you do not help humanity. Like the great Buddha, he reached the great nirvanic stage. He could have taken one more step and be one with the Supreme Brahman. But we all know he did not take the last step because he said, I want to help humanity, the suffering humanity. One who reached the nirvana and yet he comes back to help humanity. So that is where he says, this does not deter us from love and beneficence. Because just like a mother, she does not weep with a child Because a child may weep many times, may argue, might do this and that. But the mother doesn't weep. But on the contrary, helps the child. What's the problem? To show your sympathy with the child, the mother herself doesn't cry. She knows the child is in trouble and she does what needs to be done. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is saying, that this person who can be in the beatitude doesn't have to cry with the humanity and says, hey, I'm sorry. But you can still help. Nor is detailed sympathy and alleviation of a particular suffering the only help that can be given to men. To cut down branches of a man's tree of suffering is good. You should memorize this sentence. To cut down branches of a man's tree of suffering is good, but they grow again. To aid him to remove its roots is a still more divine helpfulness. This is what Sri Aurobindo and the mother have done. As I told you in one of my classes yesterday or day before. They've gone into the roots of the inconscience where suffering takes birth. All our religions, all our theaters of help, the religions and churches and temples, giving free food to the free people, free food to the to the downtrodden. All these are little, what Sri Aurobindo says, to cut down branches of the tree, but they will grow again. But the greatest thing is to cut down the roots, and that's what Sri Aurobindo and the mother have done. The gift of joy, peace, or perfection is a greater giving than the effusion of an individual benevolence and sympathy, and is the most royal outcome of unity with others in the universal consciousness. So now you can see how Sri Aurobindo or Lord Krishna, they explain to Arjuna that you don't have to show sympathy, cry and saying, hey, what is happening to these elderly people? Am I going to kill all this my gurus and pitrus? So what Lord Krishna wants to say in the light of what Sri Aurobindo has said is that you have to take away this sorrow and suffering on a different level, from a different level. Don't show this sympathy, oh, you are my guru and pitru and your uncle, and this is all showmanship of sympathy, philanthropy. He says it doesn't lead you. Ultimately he says, okay, if you don't want to kill, okay Arjuna, don't bother. I have many people to kill. So it's not that you are sacrificing a great thing. And the worst thing, which he says in chapter 11, is that they're all already killed. What are you trying to do? So he shows his Vishwarupa by saying, look, how I am swallowing this entire army, both sides. They're already killed, they're coming into me. So I am asking you to be an instrument in this passage. I'm not asking you even to kill them, they're already killed. It's over, the game is over. It has to be enacted on the physical level. So you see now the deeper truths, how they come out in the Gita. And of course, I think we'll make a good stop at this, because after that we have a different argument.